Okay, so if I look and I write my factors, I have one for 12. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. For 36, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 12. Oh my gosh. 18, 36. And I only know that because honestly, like, we totally just did 36. It's like right here. Okay, otherwise I don't think I pulled that out of my head. So I'm going to look for the biggest number they have in common, and it's right there, 12. So the GCF is 12. That's the greatest factor they have in common. All right. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this one. I'm going to do a couple of them with you, and I'm going to let you try one. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to let you try this one. Okay. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to find the GCF of the numbers and the GCF of the letters, okay? So what's the invisible coefficient here? Well, it's a 1. So I'm going to start by looking at my number GCF, and then I'm going to look at my letter GCF, okay? So my number GCF, I have a 1 and a 2. Well, that's 1 and 1 and 2, right? Because the only factor 1 has is 1. The only factors 2 has are 1 in itself. So the GCF of my numbers is 1. Now I'm going to look at my letters. I have x squared and xy. So I'm just going to expand those. So I have x times x and x times y. Well, the thing they have in common, they both have one x. Now I can't say they have two x's because this one doesn't have a y, this one doesn't have another x. So all they have in common is one x. So my greatest common factor of the whole thing is 1 times x, which is 1x, or just plain old x. Okay? I'm going to do more examples. We are going to do a ton of examples of this tomorrow in class. So like if you're like, what? Don't freak out. Okay? I may not be able to let you do many examples because I want you to really see me working these out. Let's try this one because it's got 3 of them. I'm probably going to let y'all do number 4. Okay? Let's look at this one. I have 3 things I got to find the greatest common factor of. 2x, 4x squared y, 6xy squared. Now, what I can do, what do I know these all have in common? I'm hoping that what you're saying is they're all divisible by 2. Like, the biggest thing I can divide these all by is 2. So I have 2 times x. I have 2 times x times y. Here I have 2 times 3 times x times y times y. Okay, again, all I did was I can kind of already see that they have a 2 in common. Kind of like here, y'all probably already knew without doing any of this that the greatest common factor was 12. Okay, so I'm going to look at what number they have in common, or numbers. They all have a 2 in common, but they don't have any more numbers in common because this one only has 2. They all have an x in common, but they don't have anything else. So for this one, my GCF is 2x. Okay? So far so good? Okay, so now let's look at this one. This one's a little tricky. So I want you to try to expand it yourself. I'm just going to give you a minute to try to expand it yourself. And you're all going to say, well, what about the negative? Negative, anytime you see a negative, it has a factor of -1. So take out the -1. And then I want you to try to find the greatest common factor. So I'm telling you right now, they both have a -1 as a factor. Go from there and see if you can find the rest of the greatest common factor. Okay, so if I look at this one, I have -13, oh my gosh, so much, x to the third, ab. I have -18x squared, a. So I said they all have -1 as a factor because they're both negative. This one, I can also multiply by 13. And then I can do x times x times x times a times b. And this should be just times, sorry about that. This should be times. And then this one, for 18, I can do 2 times 3 times 3, because 2 times 9 is 18, 3 times 3 is 18, so 2 times 3 times 3 gives me 18. Then I have x times a. So now I'm going to start collecting things they have in common. They both have a -1, but they don't have any more numbers in common. They both have an x. They both have another x, but they don't both have another one after that. They both have an a, but they don't both have a b. So when I write that down, my GCF is -1 times x times x times a, which is negative x squared a. And if you put negative 1x squared a, totally fine. It's not wrong. But we just don't usually put that one in there. Okay, so this is just finding the greatest common factor. The thing that we're going to do now is we're going to factor out the greatest common factor. So let me show you how we do that. So I think we already did this one. We already did x squared and 2xy, and we agreed that for this one, the GCF was x. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to expand each term and cancel out an x. So we're going to put both of these over our greatest common factor, x. And then we're going to rewrite it expanded. Okay, so we have x times x over x plus 2 times x times y over x. And then we're going to cancel out that x. So these cancel out, and these cancel out. What's left is x plus 2y. But when originally this was one of my factors. So basically what I'm doing is, when they started this problem out, they distributed an x. We're undistributing that x. By dividing everything by x, we're undistributing that x. So x squared plus 2xy is equivalent to x times x plus 2y. How can we check that? We can stick that bad boy in a box. Okay? Oops, that's too much box. Okay. So I can do x times x plus 2y. X times x is x squared. 2y times x is 2xy. X squared plus 2xy. So basically you can see that all I did here was undistribute the greatest common factor. Okay? Let's try another one. Okay, so for this one, oh, we're not going to do this one, by the way. For this one, okay, so I have negative 4x minus 14. So I'm going to start by finding my GCF. Okay, so I have negative 4x and negative 14. Well, negative 4x is negative 1 times 2 times 2 times x. Negative 14 is negative 1 times 2 times 7. Okay, all I'm doing is factoring it. I know that 4 is 2 times 2, but since it's negative, negative 1 is also a factor. So they both have a negative 1 in common. They both have a 2 in common, but nothing else. Okay, so my GCF is negative 2. Who can see? Can anybody see what the rest of it is? What's left? 2x plus 7. See, I have 2x and a 7 left behind. That's all that's left, therefore that's my other factor. Now, if I wrote it just like we did before, and I wrote it with the top over the bottom, it would be negative 4x over 2, negative 2, minus 14 over 2, over negative 2, right? Negative 4 divided by 2 is 2x minus negative 14 over 2 is negative 7. 2x plus 7 is exactly what I got inside. Okay? Let's try this last one. And again, we're going to do more tomorrow. So if you're a little bit like, what? Just don't worry. We're going to do a little more tomorrow. Okay, so let's try this one. If I'm looking for the greatest common factor, I'm going to write it, expand it. So I have 25a squared plus 35a. When I look at my factors, that gives me times 5 times a times a. That's a 5, by the way, before y'all freak out. Okay? And then I have 1 times 5 times 7 times a. I circle all the things they have in common. Okay, so I have 1 times 5 times a, which is 5a. And then I have 5a plus 7 left. Okay? We're going to practice this a ton tomorrow. If you need to, look back over the video. I think I only had one question. I just want to make sure that you guys we're going to practice this a ton tomorrow. All right? I'll see you then.